The lake had been there longer than anyone could remember. Longer than the neat sidewalks, longer than the matching mailboxes, longer than the polished sign at the neighborhood entrance that read Willow Crest Estates. It was a wide, quiet stretch of water, rimmed with cattails and old oak trees, the kind of place where mornings stayed cool and the surface stayed glassy until noon. For years, the Homeowners Association treated the lake as if it were a private amenity. They posted tasteful signs along the gravel path, residents only. They scheduled fishing hours, approved paddleboard colors, and fined anyone who dared launch a kayak without the proper sticker. No one questioned it. HOA rules were just part of life in Willow Crest. No one, until Evan Brooks moved into the small, weathered house on the north edge of the water. Evan wasn't impressed by polished signs or laminated rule books. He was a quiet man in his late 40s, with a habit of waking early and drinking his coffee on the back dock that came with the property. From that dock, the lake looked endless, not owned. Free. The first letter arrived 2 weeks after he moved in. It was formal, sharp, printed on heavy paper with the HOA logo stamped at the top. Notice of violation. Unauthorized use of HOA-managed lake facilities. Evan read it twice, then once more, slower. According to the letter, he had violated association rules by fishing without registering his equipment and by maintaining an unapproved structure, his dock. He laughed, not loudly, just a short breath of disbelief. That dock had been there when the house was built. Older than the HOA itself. Still, Evan attended the next HOA meeting, sitting in the back of the community center, while board members spoke confidently about shared assets and private access. When his turn came, he asked a simple question. "Can you show me the document that says the HOA owns the lake?" The room went quiet. The board president adjusted her glasses and smiled tightly. "The lake has always been managed by the association." "That's not what I asked," Evan replied. "They promised to follow up." Instead, another letter arrived. This one included fines. That was when Evan stopped attending meetings and started making phone calls. Within a week, he had requested county plats, historical surveys, and property records that hadn't been touched in decades. The more he read, the more certain he became. The lake wasn't theirs. And somewhere in a dusty county archive, the proof waited, inked onto paper long before Willow Crest Estates had a name. Eleanor spent the next week immersed in city records. She arrived early at the Willow Creek Municipal Office, armed with a notebook, a stack of pens, and a quiet determination. Filing cabinets loomed like silent guardians of history, each drawer filled with deeds, surveys, and correspondence that had long been forgotten. Her first stop was the Property Records Department. An elderly clerk named Mr. Whitman, with spectacles perched on the edge of his nose, guided her through the labyrinth of old documents. "People rarely ask about Lake Serenity," he remarked. "Most assume it's part of the city park system." Eleanor nodded politely, though her mind was already racing with possibilities. For hours, she sifted through pages that smelled faintly of ink and dust. Maps of Willow Creek from the 1960s showed the neighborhood, just as it was being plotted. Survey lines traced each lot carefully, but the lake appeared as a large, open space labeled simply Public Water Reserve. That term piqued her interest. It suggested that legally, the land wasn't privately owned by any resident or organization. Then she stumbled across a series of letters between the town, council, and the developers of Willow Creek. The correspondence was typed on yellowed paper, edges fraying from age. Eleanor read carefully. The letters confirmed that when the neighborhood was developed, the developers had agreed to donate the lake and surrounding land to the city for public use. There were specific conditions: no permanent structures, free access for residents, and maintenance to be shared between the city and the HOA. Her heart raced. If these documents were accurate, the HOA had no legal claim over the lake. Their notices and fines were, in essence, invalid. But Eleanor also knew she needed something definitive, something that would leave no room for doubt in court or public opinion. Finally, in a dusty corner of the archives, she found it. A single envelope addressed to the Willow Creek City Clerk, postmarked 1965. Inside was a letter from the developers themselves, stating explicitly that Lake Serenity and its immediate surroundings were being transferred to the city. The HOA's name didn't appear anywhere. It was a simple, one-page document, yet it carried the weight of decades. Eleanor carefully made a copy. She could almost picture the HOA board receiving it, a single letter that would unravel years of assumed authority. But she also knew that presenting this letter would require tact. The HOA was deeply invested in the lake, not just emotionally, but in terms of the influence it gave them over the neighborhood. Later that evening, Eleanor sat on her porch with a cup of tea, the letter resting on the table before her. She realized that this wasn't just about the lake, it was about fairness, the rule of law, and standing up to an organization that had overstepped its bounds. One letter, decades old, had the power to shift an entire community's understanding of what was theirs and what wasn't. Tomorrow, she would confront the HOA. And she knew this confrontation would not just be about Lake Serenity, it would be about asserting truth in the face of long-standing assumptions. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening, and Eleanor arrived early, clutching the letter like a shield. She could feel the tension in the air as residents trickled in, some whispering nervously, others trying to act indifferent. The HOA board, dressed in their usual crisp attire, greeted neighbors with polite smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Chairman Carlton called the meeting to order. "Tonight," he said, "we will discuss community updates and policies, including lake usage." His tone carried the confidence of someone accustomed to authority, someone who assumed control without question. Eleanor waited until the agenda reached the lake discussion. When Carlton opened the floor for questions, she stood, her voice calm but firm. "I have a document I'd like to present regarding Lake Serenity's ownership," she said, producing the letter and passing copies to the board and residents. Gasps rippled through the room as eyes scanned the yellowed pages. The letter was clear. It outlined the donation of the lake and surrounding land to the city, signed by the original developers and witnessed by the town clerk. There was no ambiguity, no mention of the HOA's ownership. Eleanor paused, letting the room absorb the weight of the discovery. "This proves," she continued, "that Lake Serenity has been public property since the neighborhood's founding. The HOA's claim and the fines issued have no legal standing." Chairman Carlton's face turned red, and the room went silent. A board member stammered, "But we've maintained the lake for years." Eleanor nodded. "Maintenance does not equal ownership," she said. "You've done good work caring for the area, but that does not give legal rights to restrict access." Residents began murmuring, some expressing relief, others frustration that they had been misled. One longtime neighbor stood and said, "I've been fishing here since I was a kid, and suddenly I get a letter saying it's off limits. This is absurd." Others nodded in agreement, emboldened by the proof in Eleanor's hands. Carlton attempted to regain control. "We acted in the community's best interest," he said. "We never intended harm, only to preserve property value." Eleanor shook her head gently. "Preserving property is one thing, but creating a false ownership claim is another. The law is clear. The city owns the lake and residents have every right to access it." The mood in the room shifted. Residents felt empowered. The weight of decades of uncertainty lifted. The board, realizing the legitimacy of Eleanor's evidence, could no longer assert control. After a tense discussion, Carlton reluctantly agreed to meet with city officials to clarify the lake's status and formally rescind any fines or restrictions the HOA had imposed. Eleanor's single letter had done what countless arguments and complaints had failed to achieve. It restored clarity and fairness. For the residents of Willow Creek, it was more than a legal victory. It was a reclaiming of their community's shared treasure. As the meeting adjourned, neighbors thanked Eleanor personally, and a sense of unity returned. The lake, which had been the center of dispute, now became a symbol of collective ownership and trust, protected not by fear or fines, but by truth. The following week, Eleanor accompanied a delegation of HOA members to the City Hall. They met with the town clerk and a representative from the city attorney's office to formally review the letter she had discovered. The moment the clerk examined it, he nodded with recognition. "This confirms the lake has always been public property," he said. "The HOA has no legal claim to restrict access. Any previous notices or fines must be nullified immediately." Back in Willow Creek, word spread quickly. Neighbors who had felt frustrated or excluded returned to the lake with renewed enthusiasm. Children splashed in the shallow edges, teenagers practiced kayaking, and families picnicked along the grassy banks. The lake, once a source of contention, had become a true gathering place again. The HOA, humbled by the revelation, convened another meeting to address their mistakes. Chairman Carlton spoke first, his voice unusually subdued. "We overstepped our boundaries," he admitted. "While our intention was to maintain the lake, we now understand that ownership and stewardship are separate. Going forward, we will focus on care, not control." Residents listened, some skeptical, but the mood was largely forgiving. Eleanor spoke next, gently reminding everyone that the lake had always belonged to the community. "This isn't about punishment," she said. "It's about knowing the truth and respecting shared spaces. We all benefit when rules reflect reality, not assumptions." Her words resonated, bridging the gap between longtime neighbors and the HOA. With clarity restored, new arrangements were made. The city agreed to oversee official maintenance, while the HOA could continue voluntary projects, planting flowers, organizing cleanups, and hosting family events, but without asserting ownership. Signs went up along the lake declaring it a public space, free and accessible to all. As weeks passed, Willow Creek felt more connected than ever. Residents took pride not only in their lawns and homes, but in the collective responsibility for lake serenity. Evening walks along the shoreline became a common sight, and stories of Eleanor's discovery were recounted with admiration and gratitude. The single letter that had remained hidden for decades had reshaped the community's understanding, proving that even a small piece of evidence could make a profound difference. Eleanor herself often visited the lake, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends or neighbors. Standing at the edge of the water, she would smile at the sunlight dancing across the ripples. She realized that this victory wasn't just about proving the HOA wrong, it was about restoring trust, fairness, and a sense of belonging. Lake Serenity, with its gentle waves and quiet beauty, belonged to no single person or group. It belonged to everyone who cherished it, and thanks to one determined resident and one long-forgotten letter, that truth was finally recognized. Willow Creek had learned a lesson in history, law, and community that would not soon be forgotten. Enjoying this story about Lake Serenity and the HOA showdown? Hit that subscribe button to catch more real-life neighborhood mysteries and community stories. Give this a like if you found it eye-opening, and drop a comment below. What would you have done if your HOA claimed something that wasn't theirs?